This video will show you how to position Python tkinter scale widgets onto a window. Consider this computer program and its runtime. And if you look here, we have the usual lines of code that we need when we're dealing with tkinter. I won't discuss those. They've been covered in the past quite a lot. What I'd like to do now is to look at this program statement. And what we can see, we have this name, my_scale_1, and that's going to be bound to an instance of the scale widget, because remember the scale widget is based on a class, and this widget is going to be associated with the window that we created on the line above. And here you can see we're going to orient the scale in a vertical sense. So what we can see here is I'm now going to bind this name using essentially the same on the other side of the equal sign, but look here, and I'm making the orient equal to horizontal. So this is going to create a horizontal scale. If we now come to here, we can see that we're going to be positioning the scale, which is the vertical scale. And if you look, that's the name that's going to be bound to the vertical scale. We're going to invoke the grid method, and you can see here we have a dot because we're dealing with dot notation. And if you look within the brackets here that we're passing as arguments to the grid method, we can see the row is 0 and the column is 0. So if we consider row 0 and look at the output, what I'm doing, I'm highlighting all of row 0. If we come here, we can see we're dealing with column 0. And if we look to the output, we can see all of that is column 0. So when we consider this, we know the scale is going to be put into row 0, column 0, which is here. We can now consider this program statement, which is going to position the second scale that we've got within this program, and it's going to position it at row 0, and we've already said this is row 0. But if we come here, we can see column 1. And of course, this is column 1 here. So when we look here, we can see we've got row 0, column 1, and that will be responsible for placing this horizontal scale at row 0, column 1. Now consider this computer program here. And what I recommend is you pause the video and have a go at typing this up yourself. Now, it's always very tempting to put the program somewhere for you to go and download, but I always recommend when you're writing code yourself, type it in yourself, because as you're doing so, it certainly reinforces your understanding of what's going on. Otherwise, you just end up being a copying, pasting programmer without really knowing what's going on. When you've finished entering this program and getting it to work and seeing what the output is, what I recommend you do then is to look here, and you can see we've got the rows both being 0 and the columns being different. And I would like you to change it, as you can see here, where the rows are different but the columns are the same. Now, before you make this alteration, try and predict what the output will look like. On this slide, you can see I've taken out the two lines that are responsible for placing both of the scales onto the window. And we're going to see what indeed the output will be when these two are the lines responsible for the positioning of the scales. So let's have a look at what the output will be, and it's this here. And if we consider this, we can see that they're in different rows. Now, this is row 0, and this here is row 1. So we can see that they are in different rows. If we come here, we can see they're both in column 0. Now this is column 0. So when you're thinking about the positioning of the scales, you need to have an understanding of the fact that although it's not obvious when you look at the forms, it is split up into rows and columns. And that's because there is an invisible grid effectively over the form that you as a programmer have to be aware of when you're using the grid method. You can now see I've extracted these two program statements, and on this occasion what we're going to see is the output looking as you can see here. Now, If we look to the two program statements, we can see that in the same row, the scales that is, and this is row 0. If we look at the columns, we can see they're in different columns, and that's column 0 and that's column 1. I would now like you to complete this exercise before you go on with other videos in the playlist. I want you to write a computer program that will produce this output, where you can see there are 3 vertical scale widgets, effectively side by side. I would then like you to write another computer program where you can see we have 3 horizontal scale widgets side by side, and then I'd like you to write another program where you can see we have these 3 horizontal widgets effectively one above the other. The next video in the playlist will show you the computer programs responsible for producing the 3 outputs that you see here. Please consider subscribing to the channel and click the bell to ensure you get an update every time I upload a video. Maybe you would like to consider supporting the development of these free videos via Patreon. In addition, why not follow me on Twitter and also check out the supporting website.